immediately following, thank you. Immediately following the call, we will be distributing a press release that will include a link to the recording. So we'll make sure everyone here has that recording. And if you'd like to go ahead and drop your name or email in the chat. I know some have joined via a cell phone, and therefore I want to make sure everyone gets it that is attending. But without further ado, I will begin. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is R.G. Schwarm, and I am the Executive Director for Cleaner Iowa. As I mentioned, we will be distributing a press release with a link to the recording. At the conclusion of Susan Collins' comments, we will open up for any questions any participants may have. As I mentioned, I'm with Cleaner Iowa, and we are an Iowa nonprofit corporation created to educate and inform the public on responsible waste management, the benefit of container deposit systems, and other environmental issues. It is my privilege to be introducing Susan Collins, President of the Container Recycling Institute. Susan has led CRI since 2009 and has worked with environmental organizations, businesses, and state and federal governments throughout the United States and around the world to educate the public on the benefits of packaging recycling. Prior to 2009, Susan was a consultant for 20 years and assisted over 80 public agencies with their solid waste and recycling programs. Susan has served on the board of the National Recycling Coalition since 2010 and has testified before numerous state legislatures, including the Iowa legislature in 2018. Founded in 1991, CRI has become recognized as the expert source of information on container recycling and container deposit systems and plays a vital role in educating policymakers, government officials, and the general public regarding social and economic and environmental impacts of container deposit container systems. And CRI also works to debunk myths about container recycling promoted by bottle bill opponents. As I'm sure all are aware on this call, there are proposals in both chambers at the Iowa legislature, one of which, Senate File 2378, passed the Senate last week. As a leading expert in container deposit laws, I appreciate Susan taking the time to share the full impact should Senate File 2378 be enacted into law. With that, I will hand it over to Susan.
Thank you, RG, and good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here to report on recycling. So I'll start with talking about the current bottle bill that exists in Iowa. You're all familiar with the bill there, but may not know some things about the way it compares to programs in other states. So first of all, Iowa is the only state in the United States that does not require the distributors to report their sales and returns to the state. All of the other programs require that reporting of a redemption rate and the total sales numbers to the state agency. It's also the only state in the US that allows the distributors to keep 100% of the unclaimed deposits with no strings attached. Also, at this point in time, there are at least 1,600 convenience stores that accept redemptions from the public, 545 grocery stores, and 60 redemption centers. So that adds up to more than 2,000 points of return around the state, which is a high level of convenience technically. But as you all know, retailers across the state are sort of thumbing their nose at the law by blatantly defying their obligation to redeem. And that's been a real struggle in Iowa. The redemption centers, many of them have closed down over the last 20 years because they are still operating on the 1 cent per container handling fee that they receive for doing their work. There is no other state that has a handling fee that has not increased it at some point in time. Obviously, you can't keep the same level of paycheck for 30 or 40 years and still be expected to operate. So these factors, the retailers defying the law and the closing redemption centers, make it much more difficult for Iowans to get their nickels and dimes back currently. So it's already in need of updating and in need of reform. And the current estimate is that those lost nickels, the amount that people cannot get back because they don't have a convenient way to redeem, it currently adds up to about $48 million. And that goes straight to the distributors, and they don't have to do anything with that money. There are no strings attached. So that's clearly problematic. It sets up the wrong incentives. So Container Recycling Institute is in opposition to SF 2378 because the bill would remove retail stores' obligations to refund consumers 5-cent beverage container deposits after July 1st of 2023. In other words, consumers would no longer be able to conveniently turn in their beverage containers at one of the 2,000 retailers where beverages are sold. Instead, they would have two options. They would either redeem the containers at one of the only 60 remaining redemption centers. And we know that those redemption centers are under pressure from not getting a raise in decades. And more of them may close, we don't know. Or consumers could just forfeit the deposit by throwing their containers in the trash or recycling them in their curbside bins. In short, this bill would turn what was a deposit into a fee for consumers who would be increasingly inconvenienced and de-incentivized from returning their containers to receive their rightful deposit back. Meanwhile, distributors would get to keep additional unclaimed deposits as a windfall, while municipalities would have to pay more to handle the extra waste and recycling and litter created by the deterioration of the bottle bill system. We actually estimate through our modeling that the recycling rate will drop dramatically and become the lowest recycling rate of any container deposit law in the United States. So while this bill is not technically a repeal of the entire bill, SF 2378 would effectively be a repeal of convenience. Such an action could decimate Iowa's redemption system, but consumers would still have to pay their deposits. Additional impacts, we've made a list of winners and losers, and foremost among the losers would be consumers. They could lose $74 million a year in unclaimed deposits, compared to the 44 million that they already lose every year in unclaimed deposits. Meanwhile, the flip side of that is it would be a windfall of unclaimed deposits for the distributors. They are currently keeping about 44 million under the current system, and the new windfall from unclaimed deposits would be about $30 million. Another important concept that I want to share is that of the social contract. These systems and other types of government-run programs that involve a measure of consumer protection. So these systems set a rule in place where they say to the consumers, okay, consumers, you're going to pay the deposit when you purchase the beverage, and then you're going to get that deposit back in full when you do what we're asking you to do. And what we're asking you to do is turn in that beverage container for recycling. Well, when you put a system in place like that, it establishes a social contract between the government and the consumers. And the government's job is to make sure that it's as easy for people to get their deposit back as it was to pay it in the first place. So the responsibility is fully on the government's shoulders to make sure that they're doing their part. Otherwise, the social contract is broken. A couple of other impacts of 2378 are there's also a tax break that's written in for beer distributors, and we estimate that tax break would add up to $4.3 million a year, in addition to the unclaimed deposit windfall that I spoke of earlier. The whole system would probably choke the redemption points down to 100 points of redemption if all of the retailers decided to opt out. The other thing that's interesting in this one is that there's no requirement for reporting. So we're making these estimates of based on our modeling from all the other systems we see throughout the United States. But that information will never need to be reported to the state. So it'll be this windfall profit that there will be no transparency on. They've even gone a step further in this bill, something I've never seen, where it has been codified that the unclaimed deposits are the property of the distributors. And that's an extra step that I've never seen in another state. I've never seen that be introduced. So the retailers will benefit to the extent that they want to get out of the system. They'll get out of the system completely with no incentive to provide redemption services for their consumers. And the consumers are just the ones left in a lurch here. There's a couple of other things that the bill does that I want to mention, and some of them are good ideas. It incorporates mobile redemption systems. That is something that, I'm sorry, it's not just mobile redemption systems, but it's mobile redemptions with a bag drop feature. And those have been introduced in other states, and they've been very popular with consumers. Also, the bill adds high content bill and canned cocktails to the list of redemption eligible containers. That totally makes sense. It's just a technical fix. It's something that consumers love because the cans look identical. It's just, you've got beer in one and maybe a canned cocktail in the other. They all should be redeemable. That's a good change. The bill would require registration of universal product codes for each container using a method determined by the department at the state of Iowa. That's good tracking of the barcodes. It makes the whole system more efficient. That's a good change. And it would provide civil enforcement authority for program violators. And that, of course, is a terrific change because you can't have a system that tells people what to do if there's no penalty for them not doing it. So, of course, that makes sense. So with that, I think I will turn it back to RG. RG, you can let me know, did I cover everything or did I miss anything?
No, Susan, I think you hit on everything, so I appreciate that. I guess at this time, I'd open it up to any questions that any participants here on the call may have. And I'll open up chat in case anyone had anything over there as well.
RG, this is Stephen with the Register. I have a question.
All right, go ahead. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you for doing the call. Susan, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the potential impact of the mobile redemption systems. You were talking about this bill potentially cutting off redemption points, and I'm wondering if you can talk about the idea about whether these mobile systems would offset that at all. Thank you.
Good question. And the short answer is, I don't know, and nobody knows, because there are no requirements in the bill for how many of these mobile systems need to be in place, where they're going to operate, what the hours of operation, how much of the state that's going to cover. We could make some estimates if there was some kind of requirement for those mobile systems to be rigorous, but it's a concept with sort of nothing to back it up at this point. It's a concept that could be good. It would all depend on how it was implemented. And when I think about it and think about who would be operating that, and again, what their incentives are they incentivized? Are the operators of that kind of a mobile system incentivized to increase the returns to a really high rate? Or if that system is operated by the distributors, they may have a financial incentive to not recover that many containers because, again, the distributors under this law would keep all of the unclaimed deposits.
Thanks, Stephen. Any others?
Hey, RG, James Lynch here from the Gazette.
Yes, James, go ahead.
Curious whether you have any thoughts or Susan has any thoughts on the House version of the bottle bill, whether it offers any more benefits to the Senate version.
Yeah, James, I'll take a stab on that. There are a couple of things in there that Cleaner Iowa feels is important. The first is there still is an incentive for retailers to participate. Now, the Senate version, as I believe everyone here knows, is a straight exemption for retailers. The House version has a series of criteria, and while we feel that those criteria are still overbroad, it expands the convenience standard because of the I believe it's the second carve out that would allow convenience stores and grocery stores that have a certain food license to be exempted out. We still feel that that would be very harmful to the return to retail infrastructure, but the House bill does have some incentives to have retailers continue to redeem. So the first is under this bill, if they choose to provide those services for consumers, they receive the handling fee increase to 2 cents, the same that redemption centers would see. We think this is important because if they're doing the same work, why aren't they receiving the same money back for handling the containers? And that increased penny, just like it will hopefully increase more redemption centers, it will hopefully incentivize retailers to provide those services. The second is under Representative Pelosi in the House bill, there is a 5-year period in which the retailers would be obligated to contribute a half-cent handling fee or half-cent towards the handling fee. But that could be waived if they are providing redemption practices. So you have a financial incentive, and that 5-year period provides a runway to see how many redemption centers that the increased handling fee would spur. To Susan's point regarding mobile redemption centers, I think it's also valid for redemption centers. An increased handling fee, I think we all agree, will likely spur new redemption centers, but we don't know where, we don't know how many, and we don't know when. And having some guardrails to ensure that as these opportunities are increased, it still provides convenient redemption for consumers. So I would say those are the two things that all lead to more participation, hopefully by retailers. And then the other item that I think is very important to this discussion is the House would require a legislative review committee. And that would, I believe, was changed to where it would be convening prior to the 2026 legislative session. And I think that's very important because as these changes take place, it gives at least a set date in which lawmakers can come back and review what's worked and what hasn't. And hopefully we don't have to wait 4.5 more decades to address it. So those are the main things why we think the House file proposal is better, but it still does have some concerns. Susan, do you have additional comments?
No, I agree. Ensuring consumer protection and ensuring that you don't end up with what I call recycling deserts is super important. Again, if there's a deposit program in place, it has to be just as easy to get your refund as it was to pay the deposit in the first place.
Did that answer your question, James?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well,
Susan,
thank you all
I just wonder.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wonder, Susan, if you could. Sorry, I'm hearing feedback here. Hold on. You talked about the recycling desert and your concern about recycling desert. What do you see happening along those lines under this bill?
Yeah, again, since there is no guarantee that new redemption centers will open or where they will open, it's very possible, since the one thing that is guaranteed is that as of a date certain, the retailers will be allowed to opt out of the program. But there is no guarantee that there's a fallback in place, that there's a redemption center going in to fill that void, or a mobile drop-off program going in to fill that void. Since nobody's in charge of that, it's more likely than not that there will be several places in the state, could be many, many places in the state, where no redemption center comes in, no mobile system comes in to serve that location, and all of the retailers in that location go away. And then those consumers would be left in a lurch. So it would create this situation where some consumers would be well served and other consumers wouldn't, the ones in the recycling deserts.
All right, if there are no other questions, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned, a recording will be distributed along with a press release. And if there are any questions, feel free to reach out to Josie Albrecht, who has the contact information in there, or me, for those of you that are up on the hill. So thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you.